Hello, extremely beautiful English literature to 1800 students. Welcome to our first day. I just thought I would dive in on this first day and just do a little short video, not covering much time, about 4,500 years. But the good news is it's in two parts. So let's get going. A tour of British history, 3000 BC to 1500 AD. From Stonehenge to Shakespeare, Part 1. What's so fascinating about this image? It's a cycle. It's a circle. Sunrise, sunset, sunrise, sunset, winter, spring, summer, fall, winter, spring, summer, fall. Circles and a circular view of time is very Celtic and even Proto-Celtic. Take a look at that circle of Stonehenge and how it marked the passage of time. So time is a cycle. As opposed to the traditional Western linear view of time, where it's like typing on a typewriter, first one letter, then the next. So if we look at this, we can see that there was the past, the universe began, the present is now, and the future, the universe will, be destroyed. Or in your personal life, you started out in the past, a doctor delivered you and you screamed. The present, then after that it was acne. The president is now, you're like, is the professor not really ever coming to class? And then the future is, later on after this coronavirus. So that is our view of time. About 3000 BC, we have the beginning of Stonehenge, again a circle. 1,000 years later, by 2000 BC, we have this grand Stonehenge. And then 500 years later, we have the whole thing with the inner ring. Here's a stone circle at Avebury. So Stonehenge is, it's like a chain. There's a lot of stone circles in the British Isles. This one is so large that there is a town and highways inside of it. I have been to Avebury. I will neither confirm nor deny that I licked one of these stones and caused my son-in-law to lick one of these stones. That is Stonehenge as it looks today. It looks like a giant threw a bowling ball and knocked down a lot of the pins. But that's how it looked like when it stood. This is from the outer ditch looking in. That's as close as you can get. You can see in the bottom right the rope, unless you're a druid on a high holy day, and then you can go inside. So the Proto-Celts, the people before the Celts, or maybe the early Celts, did circles, they did spirals. Again, this is on a very ancient stone, much older than Stonehenge. I'll show you where that is in a minute. And it is these spirals representing the circle of life. Sorry. They love circles so much. This is in southwestern England, a place called Silbury Hill. And the landscape looks very much like central Oklahoma, except for this gigantic, perfectly round hill. Why is that perfectly round hill there? They built it. And when they built it, it was larger than the Great Pyramid in Egypt. Here is a circular mound, and this is at Newgrange, just north of Dublin. If you look on the very front, you'll see some stairs. There's a stone there. That is where those spirals were from. So this is basically a Jackie Onassis pillbox hat, 100 yards across from the back to the front. And in the back, daylight hits the back wall. This is about half a mile away, burial mounds nearby Knowth. That's me looking inside. This joke you won't get till after the course is over. Where's the Green Knight? Okay, that'll pay off later. So the Celtic era, there was the Stone Age era before the Celts, or maybe they were Proto-Celts, but at least from 500 BC to 660 AD came the Celts. The Celts basically dominated all of Western Europe. You can see that this map, everything in red, even the brighter red, are the Celts. They went down and slapped around the ancient Greeks when they were forming a civilization and made the Greeks cry. Then they went down and slapped around the Romans and made the Romans cry when they were developing their civilization. Later, they apparently moved into the Iberian Peninsula of Spain, and perhaps they moved in to the British Isles about 50 BC. In Britain, they weren't one homogeneous sort of culture. They broke up into dozens and dozens of different tribes, much like we know in Oklahoma with Native Americans. Native Americans, however, come from different bloodlines, different tribes, different genetics. But these people were all related. They're cousins in a way. And they speak the same language and they have the same gods. But they weren't united politically. Celtic style, you could see here's a Celtic man and his wife. He has this hairdo via 1980's Billy Idol, nice day for a white wedding. They all wore sort of handlebar mustaches. They were all blonde. How do we know? Well, if they weren't blonde, they dyed their hair in horse urine by Clairol. On their shields, you can see the circles. You can see the spirals. They were great metalsmiths. They designed chainmail armor. They invented it. We think of that as much later in the Middle Ages, but no, they invented it in ancient times. And the Romans came along and went, whoa, that's kind of awesome. They were crazy brave warriors. The Greeks and the Romans thought of themselves as brave, but they're like, no, the Celts are crazy brave. As you can see here, this one takes a head. They believe that for powerful enemies, well, for all enemies, all people, the spirit of the person was in the head, and so they would take the head as a kind of trophy and put them in there on the walls of their houses, much like Okie men put deer antlers. Arr, arr, arr. Again, they were crazy brave. They would come screaming down the top of a hill, down on top of, some Romans, a few Romans in armor. They'd be screaming at the top of their lungs. They would be blowing trumpets. And sometimes, for added shock effect, they would charge completely naked. Now, that's just going to ruin your whole day if you're Roman. You're going to look at this and go, at least put some clothes on if you're going to kill us. But if the Romans held their ground, and they most often did, then not having clothes doesn't really help protect you, as you can see from this guy laying on the ground with a spear through his chest. The Druids were the intellectual class of the Celts. Imagine today if you got a bachelor's degree in any field. They gave you a ceremony and they made you a Druid. So the Druids were simply the intellectuals. They could be priests or judges, philosophers, physicians, poets, prophets. And this is what a Druid looked like. It looked very much like a 1950s beauty contestant, beauty queen, with very fabulous earrings and a beautiful tiara. Celtic life, we don't read much about the Celts in high school history because they never developed cities. They preferred to live in a country environment in these beehive-like homes in little villages. Here is a little Celtic home with a fence around it to keep out the wolves. If we go inside, we can see that really it looks a lot like some of the Native American structures down in Anadarko, the little Indian, the Indian city. Except on the wall, you see the spirals and the plaids, the Celtic plaid. Celtic art is wild. It's beautiful. This was a torque which was worn around the neck, both men and women. Again, it's a spiral. Later, the Celts become Christians, and you can see that this isn't an ordinary cross. It has a circle around the cross beams, and that circle obviously represents life centered upon the cross of Christ. And then within it, you can see a lot of circles of spirals. So the Romans come in and they occupy Britain. They first come in 55 BC with Julius Caesar. He sort of gets his bottom kicked. Some of his boats are destroyed in the ocean, and he declares himself a victor and goes back to Rome. But then later, 100 or so years later, they came back and they occupied. So Romans on the march. The boys are marching. They're getting ready. Let's go get some Celts, because I'm Batman. No, sorry, wrong guy. Spare no one, boys. Kill the Celts. Conquer them. You can see that the Roman Empire at its height was gigantic, one of the great empires in world history. It spanned all the way in the south, east, Egypt. If you go up from there, all of the Middle East and what we call Turkey, you go west to Spain, and all the way up to Britain, that is to say England and Wales, part of Scotland, we'll talk about that, but not Ireland. They never got to Ireland. The Roman Empire eventually became too big to manage by one person, so they split it into two parts. The part that we think of as the Roman Empire is in brown. It's the Western Roman Empire. And the other part is the Eastern Roman Empire, or also known as the Byzantine Empire. Roman roads, they were amazing at building roads, and they have a network of them all over the British Isles. I have driven on those roads. They're still good roads after 2,000 years, unlike roads in Edmond. What happened was the Roman Empire had a philosophy, and that philosophy was simply to conquer every square inch of the planet Earth. And so their plan was simply to conquer everyone. But they changed their policy. There was an emperor named Hadrian, and he conquered England, he conquered Wales, he was conquering up into southern Scotland, and he ran into some crazy kind of cousins of the Picts, of the Celts called the Picts. And they decided, whoa, let's stop here. These people are crazy town. So they built a wall and they said, this side is the Roman Empire, the other side, they're just Nutsyville. And so they kept the Picts at bay. Later, they decided to push further, and the Antonine Wall made of wood, but that kept getting overrun, and they had to pull back to Hadrian's Wall. This is Hadrian's Wall today. Obviously, it was much taller, but it runs all the way across northern England, and they have taken the stones over the centuries, and they built churches, farmhouses, barns, things like that. So the base is still there. I will neither confirm nor deny that I have been to this wall, and I have a little chunk I have here in my hand, actually on my desk. But I will neither confirm nor deny that, because that'd be probably immoral. But the purpose was to keep the Celts beyond the wall, or at least if they were coming in, to monitor them for trade purposes. Now this is a groundhog sighted near the remnants of Hadrian's Wall. We'll see if he sees his shadow and runs into, inside a little domicile. Oh yeah, there he is. He's in fact burrowing into a guard tower at Hadrian's Wall. This is the Roman bath at a conveniently named place called Bath in southwest England. The Romans loved their bathhouses. They were their kind of living rooms after work. Everyone went and they hung out. They took baths. This bath, of course, is heated by nature. It's boiling hot, boiling springs coming up out of the ground. I do not recommend you touching that water as I did and burned my hand, nor do I recommend that you drink it as I did. Oh, delicious. Not really. In 410 AD, the Visigoths, led by Alaric, invade, loot, and sack Rome. Actually, they did it a few years later, a few years earlier, about 407, 408. Rome was not the capital at that time, but it was considered the eternal city, never to be captured. It was the heart of the Roman Empire. The city's fall sent shockwaves around the empire. Rome's fall made the Roman leaders wonder why they wasted 3 legions in Britain when they couldn't even defend the eternal city. In 409, Rome pulls all its armies out of Britain to defend Rome. So long, and thanks for all the fish. The Britons declare themselves independent of Rome and prepare to defend themselves. The Roman Empire falls, the Dark Ages begin. So wherever the Roman Empire fell in whatever part of Europe, that's how we mark the beginning of the Dark Ages. So think of the Middle Ages in 2 halves. The first half lasts about 500 years in most of Western Europe. That's the Dark Ages. The second half lasts about 500 years, and that we'll talk later, called the High Middle Ages. So the Dark Ages, there was running and screaming and battles and mist. So in England, it lasts from about 409 to about 1100. But military force loves a vacuum. Angles and Saxons and Jutes, oh my! Here come the Anglo-Saxons. They look kind of tough. I'm an Anglo-Saxon. So as you can see, they came from Northern Europe and Northern Central Europe, mainly from places like Denmark and from Holland and places like that. And they came and they started conquering, settling, farming the eastern part of Britain. They came by sea. They dressed in really gaudy colors. They apparently didn't, no idea of fashion sense for them. You just take a crayon box and go for it. They struck manly poses with the sun in the background. Sometimes they would crawl or walk up on the top of steep promontories just to strike manly poses with the sun in the background. So as they are invading the British Isles from the east, you can see that the Irish, the pagan, the primitive, the barbarian Irish begin invading from the west. So they didn't pour in the Anglo-Saxons by way of a massive military invasion all at once, but instead they came in waves over decades, centuries, settling in as farmers, sometimes intermarrying with the native Celts, but generally and gradually taking over the Celtic lands and slowly pushing them further and further westward. Again, meanwhile, barbarian Irish raiders did hit-and-run attacks from the west. So it was not a good time to be a British Celt because everybody was coming at you. One of the slaves the Irish captured was a Celto-Roman teenager named Patrick. Oh, faith in regard to you, happy St. Patty's Day. He became a Christian as a shepherd boy in Ireland. He escaped. He went back to Ireland. He spread the gospel of Christ. They all became a Christian. and we all celebrate by drinking green beer. British Celts, feeling the pressure of the invading Anglo-Saxons, they flee Cornwall and Wales. They get in ships and they migrate to Brittany in northwest France. Now, why is it called Brittany? Because they named them after the Celts of Britain, Britons. So it's Little Brittany. You may have heard of Brittany. They make spears. You may have heard of Britney Spears. Well, they were not that innocent. That's all I'm saying. Now, also notice this little thumb of peninsula for later in the story. Later, we're going to talk about that little peninsula. We'll call it the thumb. So remember that. So this was what it looked like about, I don't know, say 500 AD. It says 550. Okay, fair enough. But about 500 AD, 480 AD or so, it looked like this. So in red are the Celts, are the Angles and the Saxons. They're continually pushing westward. I guess their goal is to eventually push westward, settle westward, till there aren't any more British Celts who are in blue. Will the British Celts be pushed into the sea? Will they be completely eradicated? Who could possibly save the British Celts from annihilation? The rise of King Arthur. Oh. So this is exactly the time in history that King Arthur is supposed to have arisen according to mythology. According to certain early documents, I teach a course on King Arthur, and we cover all of that. But somehow, as a young man, there was some sort of sword involved. He also somehow got swords from watery women, handing swords to him. He obviously would take his sword and point to the middle of a round conference table. We don't know why. And he dreamed of beverages. Again, we're not sure why. But after a generation, Arthur is mortally wounded or perhaps killed, depending upon your myth you choose. He's taken by ship to Glastonbury, and that is the end of his age. And that, of course, just makes him very sad. Arthur just doesn't like slipping away. But once he's gone, the Saxons strike back. And they push and push and push until only the green places remain. To this day, the only places that indigenous Celts live are in Ireland, which is an island just to the west of this, in Scotland there, which is to the north, in Wales, which is that peninsula to the west, and then the southwest are the Cornish. And that's the only place. Oh, except for just a little bit south of there. Don't forget that peninsula sticking out to the west, the Britons. And so the Saxons strike back. This brings in the Anglo-Saxon era, the Dark Ages, about, as I said, about 500 to 1100. And these Angles and Saxons eventually settle. They become farmers. They learn their own writing language. And so the first phase of the English language is 700 to 1100, and it is called Old English or Anglo-Saxon. And this is the beginning of the Dark Ages. You can see that this is the time that Beowulf was written, and it's the one really big name of Old English literature. The Angles and the Saxons themselves are not united. They divide into three kingdoms. There you can see in the south Wessex, the middle Mercia, the north Northumbria. And then over in white are the surviving Celts. You can see there off the left of the west is a little bit of Ireland. There's Scotland to the north, Wales, Cornwall there to the southwest. And don't forget, just off the page, the Britons. They'll come to play a role in Brittany. They're called Bretons. This is what Old English looks like on the page, which is sort of awesome. You can see that the monks or whoever that wrote this language loved to draw. This is their art. To me, it's very two-dimensional. It kind of looks like cartoons, modern day cartoons. And this is the first thing that we know of written in the English language. About 700 AD, this is called Cadman's Hymn. It is a hymn of praise to the Creator God, the Christian God, because the Angles and the Saxons had become Christianized by this time. This was written by a shepherd that really didn't know how to sing or create poetry, but by divine inspiration, this is what it sounds like. Nu way Schulon hergang, haven rekes werd, meo todes maagd ondes mogde funk, weer gwelder vader, swahe wonder gewees. Eke drieten oran stelde, he skjo erfen gernum, heaven de rof halig skippend, the midden gar mod kennis werd. Eke drieten after tjoda, Virum folden, Freya almächtig. So I may ask you, what does that sound like? What language? Well, it doesn't sound like any kind of Okie I never heard of. But it sounds like German, doesn't it? And the reason is English is a Germanic language. So in the year 700, an Englishman, a German, Danishman, and somebody from Holland could probably all sit down at a table and understand each other. English has evolved. We'll talk about that later. But that's what it looks like. Now, when you look at this, you may say, I can't read a word of this, but you actually can. If you look at the first line, second word, that's we. If you look on the second line right after the break, that's the word and. It's O-N-D here. Skip down 2 more lines, the middle you see or, and so on. And the very last word you might get, on the bottom line, it's Almighty, Almighty God. Okay, so that is Old English. The Anglo-Saxons were very simple people, very sort of like Ernest Hemingway's writing, very big fish, strong fish. So this is where they go and get drunk and hang out. It's like a tavern, but it's just very, very simple. This is the Dark Ages. Things were simple. Their art was very gaudy. They loved to dress in wild colors, as we saw before. And that's a royal ceremonial helmet from the Sutton Hoo collection. That's a shoulder piece of armor. When Vikings attack, next on Fox. So what happened was nearly 400 years later, after the Angles and the Saxons come in 793 AD or CE, the Vikings begin invading the British Isles. Ironically, the Vikings came from Northern Europe, much like the Angles and the Saxons did, particularly from Denmark and Sweden. And so they come in, and by now the Angles and the Saxons are like farmers, and they're like, you guys quit hurting us, quit whipping us. But come they did. And they came in these long ships, which were very fast and could go up rivers, and they would plunder and be out before anyone knew it. So given all the chaos, lawlessness, and widespread warfare, how do you pull your civilization out of the Dark Ages? How does it just not keep going forever in chaos? How do you push back the flood? Uh-oh, here comes the Dark Ages. I got to stop it. Nope, I'm out. See ya. So this, for much of the Dark Ages, was pretty much what it looked like. It was just a dumpster fire in a flood. Just not good. But civilization actually finds a way to make a comeback from this and establishes a very rich culture. And that's the second half of the Middle Ages. So the Dark Ages are going to fade and the High Middle Ages begin. And it'll last about 500 years in Western Europe and in British Isles 400 years. And here they are, jamming to medieval music. And that is the end, ladies and gentlemen, of part 1. So buckle down and get ready for part 2. The High Middle Ages is coming at you.